Hello. You know how it is hip and cool these days to make tier lists? I thought it would be fun to do tiers of books that I've read this year so far because I haven't had a booktube channel for very long and I have read a lot of books so far. However, I have no interest in going online and looking up cover images of all of the books I've read so far this year and then making a tier maker list thing out of them and then dragging and dropping and then figuring out how to screenshot my screen and all of these steps. So we're gonna do it the old-fashioned way with an expo marker and a big old post-it note and some books. I'm gonna do this video according to genre, so I've read kind of 3 genres, I guess you could say, this year. YA fantasy is obviously gonna be the biggest one because that's the majority of what I read. One big adult fiction pile. And then I've read 4 nonfiction books so far this year, so I've made them their own pile. I realized as I was filming this that there's so many YA books that I read in the first 3 months of the year that they're gonna require their own video. So I'm filming this interjection to say that this video is just gonna be the YA books. And I'm gonna make a second video about the adult fiction and the nonfiction books that I've read from January through March. As you probably noticed, there's no actual labels so far on this post-it note. I think the books will naturally fall into tier and then we'll label the tiers once we're done. So, I have some vague tiers in mind, but I'm gonna get to that later. So I've been really into buying box sets and then reading all 3 in a row, just kind of committing before I've even read book 1. So the first one is the Grishaverse trilogy, the Shadow and Bone trilogy. They're really beautiful, like the box set ones. I don't know if they're usually as beautiful. This background, I swear I have, that's like my laptop case background. I really liked the Shadow and Bone trilogy. I know a lot of people who are into Six of Crows, which is Leigh Bardugo's other series that takes place in this world, like the Six of Crows duology significantly more than they like the Shadow and Bone trilogy, and I understand why that is. When I first opened the Shadow and Bone trilogy, I was very confused because it's in first person. I guess it's a more traditional high fantasy series where you follow a main character through war times and she finds out that she has magical powers. That's the plot synopsis. Alina Starkov is a soldier, yada yada yada. Her regiment's attacked, yada yada yada. Alina unleashes dormant magic not even she knew she possessed. I really enjoyed the Shadow and Bone trilogy. They're all very solid books. I'd say my least favorite is probably the second one, though just because like the characters in it are, while entertaining and fun, can get annoying as compared to the first and third book. I do think that the third book kind of belongs in the same level as the first book, because while I really enjoyed the first book for like the introduction to the world, I really thought the third book was an excellent conclusion. I really liked the ending of this trilogy. I thought there were a lot of different ways it could go, and I really liked the direction Leigh Bardugo picked to go with the end. I have decided I'm going to put these 2 in a tier, so this is Shadow and Bone and Ruin and Rising, in a tier that's like, wow, these were good books. Kind of there-ish, let's say. And then Siege and Storm will go in this kind of, it was good, it was alright tier. I think the difference between these tiers is sort of this one. I had a lot to say. I like immediately texted people about it. I was like, hey, I really liked how this trilogy began. I'm having a really good time. And then in the third book, I was like, yo, I really like how this book ended. Let me tell you about it to my close friends. This one, it was a book. You know, yeah. And the next trilogy in progress on my list, which is Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. I really loved Children of Blood and Bone. This one is set in an African-inspired universe. Zeli, the main character, is the daughter of a magic practitioner who was murdered by the monarchy when all of the magic users in the nation or in this world were exterminated and like magic was done away with for good. And so Zedi and her brother Zayn and the runaway princess Amari have to find a way to bring magic back to the world of the story. And they go up against the Prince Amari's older brother. I really enjoyed the Children of Blood and Bone. It follows really interesting characters. In terms of tropes that I don't like, the sort of rivals to lovers, enemies to lovers thing is not one that's high on my list of like, oh, I'm super interested in this. And I think that for me is just like a function of my views on romance, which is that like, I'm not interested in the kind of like chemical, like sexual tension, stuff like that. Like the tension part does not really appeal to me. What does appeal to me is like this deep, you know, like trust and yearning building exercise generally. However, I did really like the romantic element in this book, which has some enemies to lovers aspects. And it's like, it's very troubled, which I actually really enjoy. I didn't like the ending, didn't understand what was happening. It all happened very quickly, and maybe that was just a function of me reading the book too quickly, because I think I got really into it and then just like sped read the end. And so I might have to go back and like reread it thoroughly. But I will say that on the whole, this was one of those books that when I finished it, I immediately went and got the second one from the store, and I told like 4 people that I just read it and really enjoyed it. I recommended it to like 2 or 3 different people immediately after finishing it. So I'm going to put it in a category slightly above the Shadow and Bone trilogy, in a category that's called I finished this book and I need to tell you everything. Children of Virtue and Vengeance, however, it is not as good as the first one. I will say that easily. The appeal of the first one for me was like the sort of really exciting like quest narrative. So there was a lot of like traveling and a lot of exploring new places and working together with one another to overcome obstacles, and a lot of like mixed morality or like very dubious ethics, especially with Anand's character. In this one, I feel like the lines are much more clearly drawn, and there's definitely some effort on Adeyemi's part to make those lines less clear, but I still think they weren't as sharp, like they weren't as murky as, it wasn't as murky as the first book, and that the murkiness and the excitement of the storyline is what I really enjoyed. So this one is just less satisfying to me, I guess. I like remember very vividly everything that happened in the first book, and I don't really vividly remember much that happened in this book. Like I do, but not to the same extent. And so I think for me, this book is going to go in that same category as Siege and Storm, which is kind of this like, well, it did what I expected it to do, but I was hoping for more category. Let's round out the series with another box set. The Caravelle series. Caravelle? Book dominoes is what we're making today. So Caravelle is like Carnival, but without the end for some reason. Another box set that I bought without knowing anything about them. I'm actually really enjoying this. So far I've really liked the books that I've just bought in Trilogy. So Caravelle takes place in a world that is kind of like nondescript European fantasy-ish. More like Italy adjacent than like England adjacent in my opinion. However, in this book, every so often there is a large game that is played, and the kind of game master sets the rules differently every time, and people are drawn into the game, and there's apparently a very large reward at the end. And so the main character of this book, Scarlet, gets drawn into the game after her sister, Donatella, convinces her to go, or like drags her along, and then gets kidnapped immediately after entering the game. And so the stakes for Scarlet to win the game before anyone else around her are like much, much higher. I really enjoyed this book. What I loved about it was the way that everything kind of had layers and layers and layers and layers of like twists and turns. I think this was a very good book at doing kind of what it pitched. So like the pitch of the book is, oh, nothing is as it seems. And I think some of the times you have a world that is nothing as it seems and a plot that is very straightforward, but this one was actually, it matched very closely. But you could still follow what was happening and everything made sense along the way. At least that was how I found it. And I really thought this book could stand on its own, like as a solo novel if that was the way the author decided to go. Of course, it was always designed to be a trilogy, but it could have been a standalone, and that's something I really value in the first book of a trilogy. So I'm going to put this in the category with Shadow and Bone and Ruin and Rising, where it was like, wow, I really enjoyed this. This was a good read for me. Book 2 and Book 3 I won't spend very much time on, kind of like I did with the Shadow and Bone trilogy. I thought Book 2, which follows Donatella, was different enough that it was super interesting and expanded the universe enough that I was very happy with it. Finale, on the other hand, it tied up fine in the end. In the beginning sections of the books, or of the book. I remember texting a friend being just irritated by the way that it was being spelled out. There were a lot of unnecessary elements, I thought, that like either were built up in books 1 and 2 and then concluded in a really unsatisfying way, or there were things that were just introduced out of the blue that didn't really make a lot of sense to me. Also, I felt like the characters were developed really strongly in books 1 and 2, but in book 3, I just didn't care about any of them. I found myself being kind of irritated when certain characters would come on the page. I found myself not really sympathizing with them. And so, on the whole, I feel like this book has to go in a category that's slightly lower, kind of like a, I don't have a lot to say, or like, I liked this, semicolon, I also didn't like certain pieces of it. It's the kind of like, but category. Okay, now we can get to books that are either standalones or the first in their grouping. Let's start with Blood Heir. I have been really excited about this book for a while. There was some controversy around it a while ago. Basically so reviews of this book were coming out and a lot of people were finding problematic elements with it, and so the author pulled the book from publication and went through some serious revisions and brought back this book with a lot of changes and like remarketed it and that sort of thing, and I think the final product turned out really well. So the main character of this book is a princess who left her kingdom after her father was killed, and she's trying to figure out what happened and like get revenge for her father's death, but also like kind of come back and claim her throne. She teams up with a very dangerous con man / criminal and goes on this adventure in a world where there are like magic and gifts. This main character has a ability that is different from most people, and she has like an affinity for blood magic, and so her magic is very dangerous and very harsh. And I think I've been reading a lot of books about blood magic lately. There are other books in this pile that are also about blood magic. But I really enjoyed this one, I think, because similar to how I felt about Caravelle, it matched the tone of the world. So like this is a world that feels very cold. It's very cold and icy. And I thought that the way that the characters acted and the way that the magic matched the world was very convincing. This definitely wasn't one of those books that I like couldn't shut up about. That's like going into there are very few books in that category, but I am gonna put it in this like, I enjoyed this book category. Next, I recommended this book in a video recently. This is Fireborn by Rosario Munda. I really enjoyed this book because of the way it discusses politics, and so I really enjoyed the world of this book. And I liked the characters enough. I definitely think that I was sometimes less drawn in than I was hoping to be. I think the like plot itself and the characters themselves were not like the kind of like standout wow blow me away type of book, but I really enjoyed the world. I really enjoyed the questions that this book was raising, and I liked like it had a lot of elements that I really enjoy. So like I loved, I think, the premise, but less so the execution. Oh my god, I didn't talk about what this book is about. This book is about two young teens, so Annie and Lee, who come from very different backgrounds and are both training to be dragon riders, members of a like elite order of the military in a world that has just replaced an aristocracy or like a monarchy type hereditary system of power with a quote-unquote meritocracy republic type thing. And so there's a lot of discussion, like direct discussion about like, can a meritocracy really exist, and to what extent do people who were rich and powerful before we transitioned out of an aristocracy going to de facto control that sort of power. Very, very pressing issues, and I really enjoyed how they were discussed. Also, groups of friends, instead of just like one or two characters who own the scene. That sort of like quasi-ensemble cast is what I'm really into. I think the things that I didn't like so much were the, you have multiple first-person narrators. It throws me, it throws me off a little bit. It was okay. I think if you're gonna do it, you have to have very, very clearly distinguishable characters, and they need to be separated very far away. And I think Children of Blood and Bone did that very well. In Fireborn, I sometimes lost track of whether Annie was narrating or Lee was narrating, and the only way I could tell some of the time was when they referred to each other in the third person. And I was like, oh, okay, Annie's name is here, so it must be Lee who's speaking. And yeah, I don't know if that was the most effective way of storytelling, I guess. You know, actually, I think I'm gonna kind of place this in the, like, I was expecting more, but it was still satisfying to read category. I'm gonna flip these on their sides now. Next, this is the latest book I read before I read Les Mis. This is The River of Royal Blood by Amanda Joy. It follows the second-born princess who has blood magic in a world where like everybody, or like some folks have magic, and blood magic is the kind of ancestral magic of humans that allowed them to take power over other groups. The main character and her sister are heirs to the throne in a throne system where if there's more than one heir, they have to fight to the death when the youngest one comes of age. And so this is about the younger sister who's always suppressed her magic and like doesn't want to use it, having to get herself up to the task and like learn how to use her magic so that she can survive when she comes of age and her older sister attacks her. I really like the premise of this book. It's very similar to the book I'm writing, so I was like, oh, I have to read this. But I really liked the characters. I can't say that this was one of those books that demanded that I read it in one sitting, but you know, not every book has to do that. I liked it fine. I didn't like the ending. The ending threw me, and it wasn't what I expected, but it did. I guess it kind of was what I expected. It was expected in that it was the unexpected thing that I was guessing that would happen. But it wasn't done in a super satisfying way, and so I'm like, well, yeah. So for that reason, I am gonna put it in that same like, it was alright category. We all know how Erica feels about Fireborn. It's going in the squeak category. Fireborn is about a idiot android princess who falls in love with a palace servant who is also a human assassin trying to kill her. And they become unwitting allies and maybe something more, as the two of them try to figure out what is going on in the kingdom, and especially with this weird, also android man who's supposedly leading a resistance force, and who's also going to marry Crier. And so the two of them team up. It's a very good book. I liked it so much. I tweeted about it before I was done with it. That usually means I'm really into a book, and this is definitely one of those books I read in one sitting. Yes, big fan. Big fan. Needless to say, it was definitely one of the books that I freaked out the most about and keep talking about and won't shut up about. It's been like 3 videos now, and I've only made like 6 videos, so yes. Penultimate book is Kingdom of Souls by Rena Barron. This is another book about a magic system in which there's a lot of magic going on in this book, and I couldn't really tell you with much clarity what the rules of the magic system are. There's definitely there's 2 types of magic. One is innate and one is not. Or one is kind of like you have to go buy magic because you don't have your own magic. And the main character, who is the daughter of a very important political figure, and then also the granddaughter of a very important political figure in a different political group. See, I'm having trouble explaining this, and the reason I'm having trouble explaining this is because it is complicated, and I like complicated political systems, and so I was really enjoying that part of it. But what I didn't enjoy about this book is that I feel like it tried to be too many things. I really struggled to grasp all of the things that were happening and put them in a reasonable order. I can't really put my thoughts about this into accurate words because I don't really felt like I was ever really captivated and drawn in. I thought the characters were lovely people. I had difficulty following the plot. I've had difficulty with some of the time skips and movement skips. There was just a lot going on and I didn't really follow it, and so I can't really say I loved this book. And because of that, I am going to have to put it in a lower category than any of the other books on here, which is my kind of I don't really know what to say category. Okay, the last YA fantasy book I read this year is Nocturnal by Maya Montaigne. This book takes place in a Latin American inspired fantasy universe. The main characters are the younger prince of the kingdom who comes back after his older brother is killed, and he is dead set on getting revenge against the person who killed his brother. And the secondary character is a thief who can steal faces of anyone she meets, except she gets that power stripped away like 6 chapters into the book, so it doesn't really play a role here. The two of them meet under like unlikely circumstances and unleash a magical, mystical, dark object that they then have to go track down and contain before it kind of ruins their world. Another one of those plots that like you feel like you've seen it before, and so you're interested to see how this author puts a spin on it. And I think in the case of this book, I think there are two problems I had with this book. Number one is that the characters felt kind of younger, and that's not a bad thing. It's a YA book. Like, the characters are meant to be younger people, but they definitely felt like they weren't having complete emotions all the time. I think there were some really big, deep moments in this book where like the characters had to grapple with really heavy things, and sometimes they were handled really, really well, and then in other cases I felt like the characters, I don't know, there's just like a weird like shallowness to the way that they felt emotions that frustrated me or like made it hard for me to get into it. And then the second thing that bothered me is that there were a lot of elements of the magic system. Like, there were tons and tons and tons and tons of things that made up this magic system, but not very many of them were explored. And I was very confused by how it worked in the beginning, and I thought that the story would, you know, help me come to understand the system, because all of those different elements would come into play, and they didn't really. A couple of things were used over and over again, and it was hard for me to track or keep track of. Unlike Kingdom of Souls, which I really struggled to read and kind of skimmed the end of, this book I did read the whole way through without kind of like stopping, and so I am going to put it in that category with Finale, which is like, I was disappointed, but it wasn't all that bad, and yeah, it just didn't live up to my expectations. That is the end of the YA fantasy books. This year, so far, I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 YA fantasy books. Now that I've thoroughly discussed these books, I think I'm going to put some names on my categories. Tier 1, books that I'm so excited about. And I'm going to make exclamation point books. There's this category down at the end. Oh, this is a little too far. I think this category way down at the end, I'm going to kind of call the ellipses. Because, like, there's not a lot I have to say about them, and that's a problem. These are definitely like well, they were alright, but, and so I'm going to make them the comma category. Yeah. These books were just satisfying. And for that, I'm going to give them a period. And looking at these again, I think I'm going to have to make this 1 exclamation point and these 2 exclamation points. There you go. Categories defined. I'll list the books that I have in my categories one more time. Ellipsis category, I don't have very much to say. Kingdom of Souls. The common category, which is, it was good, but, is Nocturnal. And Finale, the third in the Caravelle series. The satisfying, declarative, end of a sentence books. We have River of Royal Blood by Amanda Joy, Fireborn by Rosaria Munda, Siege and Storm, second in the Shadow and Bone trilogy, and Children of Virtue and Vengeance, which is second in the Children of Blood and Bone series. In the, books, exclamation books category, we have Blood Heir by Emily Wen Zhao, Caravelle and Legendary by Stephanie Garber, first and second in that trilogy. Then Shadow and Bone and Ruin and Rising, Lee Bardugo's Shadow and Bone trilogy. And then in the double exclamation point category, we have Crier's War by Nina Varela, and Children of Blood and Bone, the first book by Tomi Adeyemi. So those are the YA books.